Good morning. If you can hear me out in the hallway, get your coffee, your beverage, and head back into the main conference room.
So to kind of kick us off after a wonderful showcase, we are going to have John Mason Smith, our favorite audience participant, share with us a little bit about what we can do when we have those employees who just keep hanging us. So, welcome.
Thank you. Is this mic working, by the way? Okay, I'm not a big lavalier guy. It's nice to see a bunch of friendly faces. I'm going to immediately make you less friendly faces, unfortunately, because the first thing we're going to do is look at some actual bad employee reviews of payroll bureaus by their employees. So if you recognize any of these names, I'm kidding, I tried to censor them, but let's see what we got here. So again, these are going to be 100% authentic, real employee reviews. Pros: breakfast on a Friday, got to dress down. Working here made me really evaluate life and how I never want to be so sad in a job ever again. It made me work extremely hard to get the job of my dreams, and I don't think I'd be where I am today without this terrible experience. Cons: I'm writing this review today as I dreamt about it last night. A nightmare. Rating: 1 star. All right, let's try another one. Maybe it gets better. Pros: great coworkers. I get a chair, I can sit down. Cons: management talks poorly about employees and clients. That's a bit of a problem there. Advice to management: please do not talk about the employee in earshot of that employee. Rating: 1 star. All right, one more. Pros: benefits weren't bad. Some nice people. Cons: click, click, managers talk smack. We've all heard that one, right? Rating: 1 star. So people put these reviews online, and I think generally as employers, it can be easy to dismiss some of these as, well, of course they wrote that, right? This is someone who didn't work out for us. So the big question becomes, really, why does it matter? And we're going to talk about that today and how to get people to stay. First, I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the context for how I got the content inside this slide. So most of you might already know me. I'm JMS, John Mason Smith. I was a payroll sales rep for a while, and then I started my own payroll company, and then I sold the payroll company, and then I got into banking, and then I had 2 different banks collapse on me, and then I ended up starting HireWith, which basically what I do is I talk to people all day long who are purposefully leaving their jobs or involuntarily leaving their jobs. We're not recruiters, and the reason I point this out is I am not interviewing people that were on the fence about leaving. One of our first questions whenever we engage with a candidate is, if your current employer offered to match or counter an offer, would you stay? And if they say yes or maybe to that question, they fall off the rest of our process. So everything that you're going to see and everything we're going to talk about is data that we've collected from interviewing hundreds of real people from the payroll and PEO industry specifically that have chosen to leave or have been involuntarily pushed out. And we'll talk about the reasons here. So with that said, let's talk about why does this matter in the first place. And I have a real life story, and I had to be a little bit careful here when I put this together. So hopefully I censored everything correctly. Owners only in here, right? Okay. So why does it matter? This is a real screenshot of one of a client of ours when we Googled their name. Now, why does this matter? We kept giving them candidates that they wanted to interview, and the candidates were mysteriously canceling the interviews, withdrawing their applications before the first conversation. And after 3 or 4 candidates got cold feet prior to the first call, we said, hey, what are you doing? Like, why are you canceling? Everyone keeps canceling. They said, just Google it. Just Google the company. And if you look at these, it's not great. You know, the first one on there was like, pros: nothing is good about working here. Okay, that's a bit of a problem. You know, you scroll down a little bit more, you know, it's not getting too much better. Micromanagement to the max. And the thing is if you click through to these links and go to Glassdoor, which, by the way, who here, raise your hand if you've been on Glassdoor. Okay, raise your hand if you've never heard of Glassdoor. Okay, for you, I'm going to tell you what Glassdoor is. It is where you narc on your employer, right? This is where you report how much money you get paid, what you hate about it. It's anonymous. But the thing is you do have some sway over this. But Unfortunately, this was being, kind of ignored, and you can see a lot of one-star bad reviews here. So this is what people were seeing before this was their first impression with this particular client. And by the way, yes, I did speak to the client and we've made recommendations and things are getting better, but something to note here. So let's break down the reasons that people actually leave, because I think there's a misconception that it's always about money. And I don't think that's true. And I have data to back me up on it. So come on, little guy. Wasn't sure this guy's gonna work. Okay, so before we do that, I want everyone to get your phone out and scan this QR code. You can hit continue as guest. I want to survey the room very briefly and figure out why you think employees are leaving. What's the most common excuse people give you when they leave? And we're going to cross-reference this with what my data shows. While you're logging that in, I'm going to talk about where this data comes from. We have interviewed at this point over 400 plus Payroll Service Bureau and PEO Service Bureau employees in the last year. And when we interview these people, we ask some really clever questions that we're going to look at today. One question that I love is, how much money do you want to make? And how low is so low that you don't even want to know that we didn't tell you about a job opening, right? Another question we ask is, why are we talking to you? Like, if we weren't obviously brought to you by your employer because they sold the paychecks, then how did you end up in front of us? And we track all of that in our applicant tracking system. And I have a little bit of an obsessive hobby with going in and running analytics about why people want to leave and how much money they want. And we're going to look at some of those. So what do we got? Boss is terrible. Okay, more flowing in here. Management, leadership, money. That's the one that comes up a lot. It comes up a lot, not from the employees though. It comes up from the employers, is money. I love it. So one of the things that I noticed right away is how much of this is relationship driven, right? When you think about the conversations you have with employees, I think every conversation can boil down to one question, which is, from their perspective and from your perspective, do I want to be around this person all day long? And if the answer is no, the money doesn't really matter anymore. So, a lot. This is good stuff. All right, we're going to keep going, but if you want, memorize this slide. So when we talk to candidates, like I said, we ask them, why are you leaving? And here were the results, right? This is literally, hundreds and hundreds of interviews. Now you'll see that my data is skewed horribly at the top here for layoffs and reductions in force because of acquisitions, because guess what? That's where I get my best candidates. So to control for that, let's back out literally everyone who chose to leave, or let's back out everyone who didn't choose to leave, right? And that narrows us down quite a bit. So if we look at some of these, you're seeing things like, I want remote work being probably one of the most common reasons people are leaving, right? The other thing you're seeing is company instability. I don't trust my employer to keep me around, right? No growth opportunities, career advancements, all the normal stuff. And at the very bottom down there is like conflict with coworkers or their current employer. So if we break this out into what kinds of questions these are, it can really be broken into two categories. One is aspiration, the other is desperation. So either you're aspiring to something better, right? I want to make more money, I want to have more flexibility, whatever, or I'm desperate to get out before I'm kicked out, right? The way I think about this is it's a formula, and I call it the retention formula. And what the retention formula is very simple. There is fuel and there is friction. And whenever that becomes a negative number, you're in trouble. That's when that employee is out. So we have to break down what is causing people to stay, what is causing people to leave, and when does that get out of balance? And that's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about the fuel first. So the first one that I always think about, and all of these reasons I kind of lumped together and broke them into the commonalities. And we hear this all the time. Flexibility. Can people work in a way that actually fits their lives? Because at the end of the day, if it is a choice between my home life and my employer, and I have the ability to choose, most people choose their home life. If you have to decide between daycare for your kid versus going to the office, those compromises skew toward their personal life. So this is where we start talking about things like remote work and things like that. But this is a question right away. If it's a good, flexible job, that's fuel. Stability. Do they trust you? Do they trust leadership and culture not to blow up underneath them. So there are some cultures that are more emotional and relationship based than others, right? You know, you go to a Paychex or an ADP or one of these really giant companies and they're kind of all distant, but there's still internal drama all the time. And it's a question of individual trust. Do you as an employee trust the person that you have to interact with every day? And is the company healthy and strong? Growth. Is there forward momentum? Not promotions, right? Not just promotions, but like, am I going to be in this job forever? Let's say you have an expert on Assure Evolution on your team, but you're in the process of migrating literally everyone to UKG Ready, and you're not training them on UKG Ready. How do you think they feel right now? Ugh, right? Why are you talking to us? And they're like, because I think my job's not going to exist in 6 months, right? That's a very common reason. And then lastly, reward. This is the money, right? Does staying make financial and emotional sense? If they can't afford to work for you, they will not, because it is an economic conversation as well. I do want to point out that these are not equal, despite them all being bullet points. The reality is, for every single employee you interact with, their priorities change. There are folks who really don't care that much about how big their paycheck is. They're more driven by the fact that they're working with their best friends. There are others who maybe they have a great relationship with their coworkers, but the reward isn't enough. And they say, hey, some recruiter called me and said they'd pay me $100,000 to do the same thing I do here for $50,000, right? So there's a grass is greener thing going on at times. And again, what we tend to see is when this equation goes negative, it tends to be because one of these 4 areas is not able to overcome the friction. So let's talk about the friction a little bit. Come on, you. Maybe I should have sped up the animations. All right, the friction. Bureaucracy, right? I got a ton of forms to do. This is when salespeople, like me, love to complain about. Like, I hate going into CRM and rekeying stuff that I wrote down in 3 other places. But, you know, it comes up. Burnout, another obvious one, right? Maybe you had a really busy quarter and you lost a critical tax person and you've got someone that's doing the job of 3 people. Well, that's increasing the other side of this equation. And if you're not offsetting it in some way, that equation can turn negative and that's how you lose people. Rigid policies. So this comes from the reality that as payroll providers, we have deadlines, we have timelines that we can't budge on. But when you get to things like, you know, it's the end of the year, we have a no vacation policy, there are times when the fact that that lack of flexibility is going to kind of skew that teeter-totter the wrong direction. And it's just something to think about. And then, of course, office politics. Smack, smack, managers talk smack, I believe was how they worded it on Glassdoor, right? And the reality is, these are relationships. There's a story that I tell people a lot when I'm talking to folks that are selling their payroll bureaus, and they come to me to help rehome the staff. And I tell them, promising those employees that they're guaranteed a job at the new owner's company, it's a little bit like being in a romantic relationship and breaking up with your partner and saying, but don't worry, I've lined up a new boyfriend for you. Like, it doesn't work that way. They have to like them. Like, one thing I never thought that I was going to get salespeople, because anyone that acquires a company wants to keep the salespeople. It's free money, right? And I get salespeople all the time, because if they loved selling for local payroll service bureau ABC, does that mean they're going to love selling for iSolved? Do they want to go sell for ADP? They probably left those employers to go work for the local one because they know how great it is to work for regional local payroll bureaus, right? So the question really boils down to, how hard do we make it for you to succeed here? If it is harder to win than it is to leave, then they will just leave, right? So water, runs downhill, follows the path of least resistance. And the question just becomes, is your employer, is your workplace creating an atmosphere where the path of least resistance is to stay and continue to help grow the company? And if the answer is no, then you're going to see a lot of turnover. So let's do another one of these guys here. Come on, internet, I believe in you. Okay, so get out your phones again. We're going to do a fun thing here. So everybody, if you have already scanned this, you should be able to just open your phone back up and it should just be on the next question. But if not, you can scan it. I am curious, of these 4 fuel components, why do you think your people keep showing up? What's the one that's driving it the most? Fun fact, one of the things that I have been doing, and I need to do more of it, is running surveys, both through our internal system and then publicly, and cross-comparing how our employers respond to how the employees respond. One thing that's on here that doesn't get enough attention is at the bottom here, the rewards, the comp and benefits. At the end of the day, we have seen health insurance single-handedly make or break offers to candidates. If you think about someone that's in a state that doesn't have a state marketplace, and they're going to healthcare.gov, and your health plan doesn't have a presence within that state, and you're hiring them for remote work, that cost can be tremendous. We've seen people say, hey, I effectively make $6,000 or $12,000 a year more at the same offer by working for a company that pays for my health insurance. So these are things that we talk about a lot, but employers aren't usually thinking about them until they're in that last leg of it. So it looks like the winner today is stability, healthy relationships, and stable employer. And I agree with that. I think that's pretty fair. I'm surprised that flexibility is not a little higher up. So we did a survey, I'd say, what was it? About a week and a half ago, and I didn't put it in here. But if you go to my LinkedIn, you can find it because it was like the most recent survey I did. And we asked employees what they valued when they were considering a new role. And the number one answer was remote work. So anybody surprised to hear that?
Is it different when you're looking for a job and in a job?
Correct. So this is the other piece of that is the dynamics change depending on why you're coming to market. One thing that I find really interesting is talking to these folks that have been at a service bureau for 10 or 15 years, and they find themselves in the job market because of conditions outside their control. And those candidates, when stacked next to the candidates who find us on Google, are extraordinarily different. Ironically, the people that come to us involuntarily often are less expensive to hire. They were not trying to increase their reward. They are looking for just stability. They just don't want to be unemployed. Their bar is as low as it can be. It's, hey, I'm going to be unemployed in 3 months and it's out of my control. I want that gone. By contrast, the other thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, when it comes to remote staff, depending on where you are geographically, that can also kind of drive the cost factor in terms of the cost of hiring folks. But depending on like why and how you found a candidate or how you found an employee, it can really set the baseline expectation for what they expect out of you as an employer. And this really goes into how to make them stay. And I want to break into this a little bit. So we talked about, the first one, flexibility, work-life balance. We talked about this, right? If work life doesn't, if there's a fight between work and home life, generally speaking, home life wins. And a lot of folks, I've heard this phrase, balance is the new bonus. If you are trying to compete for a top tier performer, sometimes the best way to get them is to say, you know what? You can work Eastern hours even though we're in Central time. You know what? I don't care when you come in. We're going to measure based on performance, not based on hours, right? When you start measuring attendance instead of output, this is how you get people who just put their mouse. I don't know if you've seen on Amazon, they sell a little thing that spins and you sit your mouse on top of it and it just wiggles your mouse so you can go do your laundry and Teams says you're still there, right? Now there's tools and technology to monitor that. But the question is, why are you monitoring that if the thing you care about is the number of tickets responded to, the number of clients they're engaging with, the output of their effort? Are they lowering turnover for your clients? Are they getting good NPS scores? Those are non-emotional things you can monitor that have nothing to do with whether or not they were 5 minutes late. We had a lady who came to us, I'd say about 3-4 months ago, and she had gotten terminated from one of the large national providers. And when we were talking to her, we were trying to figure out why she got fired. Because for us, there's a dilemma that we run into literally every single time, which is they want to tell us the story that makes them look the best, and we have to figure out if they're lying. Nobody says, hey, I got fired because I was a jerk, right? We can kind of tell something's fishy. Like when someone says there was a layoff, And then I know the person whose company it was, and I call them and I say, did you have a layoff? And they say, no. Was it Cheryl? Sorry, Cheryl. Right? We know kind of what's happening there. So like, there's like, the good thing about being in a small industry is typically, I have some awareness of when those are happening, but a lot of times I don't. I have no idea what the story is. And so we go to these candidates and we say, look, we're going to be coaching you through this, right? If we're going to help you find a job, we need to figure out how to tell your story. If you go to our website and go to the candidate resources, you're going to see some really nerdy videos I did on how to tell your story and what we coach these candidates on. But one thing that we tell them is, look, treat us like your attorney. Tell us the truth. Tell us why you're coming to the market. And that will help us frame this story in a way that is helpful for what you need. And will also tell us honestly whether or not you're the kind of employee that we really need to work with in the first place. So one of the great examples, this lady, she came to us, she was fired from ADP. I started that story and then I trailed off. When this lady came to us, she said, I was let go from ADP because I was late a lot. That's kind of a problem, right? And we're like, okay. And by the way, I should mention, she didn't come to us organically. Her company had just been acquired by Paychex, right? She'd spent the last 5 years as a customer service rep for an ISOL bureau. And quite honestly, she's kind of a rock star. But we'd send her out on interviews and they'd ask why she was available and she would tell her story and she'd say, well, I got fired from ADP because I wasn't showing up on time and then these guys hired me and now they sold us and everyone's like, oh, this lady didn't show up on time. Like, I don't know about this one. And what it came to find out was that the reason she got terminated was because her and her boss didn't get along. And her boss was desperate for a reason to can her, right? And so what he did was he started logging in with a stopwatch going, you are 20 seconds late today to log into your computer. That's a write-up. 3 write-ups later, she's out of there. So the difference was the framing of the story. Sometimes these candidates don't want to be honest because they're scared of the narrative it's going to set for you. But the reality is, I think everyone in this room can smell out when a candidate's BSing you, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Trust and transparency, stability. Basically, this is one of the more common things that I hear my candidates talk about, and I never hear people in this room talk about it. So this is something I'm really excited to call to your attention, no offense, which is telling people, here's what your job is, and making sure that is actually their job. One of the things I hear all the time is, I was hired to do X, and now I'm doing Y, and I'm scared. I don't feel safe. I don't know what the roles are. I think as a salesperson at heart, everything is about setting expectations and then meeting them, right? Have you ever heard, set the bar low and make it easy? Wait, what is it? It's under promise and over deliver, right? When you come in and tell someone, hey, I want to hire you to do implementation. You're going to set up all of our new clients. But then 80% of their job is rekeying hours that come in the ticketing system because you didn't go with TDA, right? Sorry. But, when they're doing that, they're looking at themselves going, what is my long-term future here? What else was I misrepresented about? Is my job even the same job that I started? In a way, they've been demoted before anyone ever had a conversation with them. So being transparent about boundaries and not changing folks' responsibility without having an actual conversation. Much like dating, I keep comparing it to dating because these are relationships. Much like dating, what's the number one rule of a healthy relationship? Does anybody know? I'll shout it out. What's the number one rule of a healthy relationship? Communication, right? I don't know what you said. Wait, what did you say? Okay, so the better answer is communication. If you don't tell your employees what you expect and they don't tell you that they're unhappy, guess what? That equation goes negative and they bounce. Sometimes, and you'll see this if you've ever been a sales rep, and I think a lot of people who own payroll bureaus and PEOs have been sales reps or become sales reps because you are the ultimate sales rep for your company, right? And if you've ever been a sales rep, what's the number one reason people give for not moving forward with you as a provider? And this is a bit of a trick question, but we'll see if anyone can guess it. Any guesses? Okay, price, that's one guess. I have a different argument. You can tell me if I'm wrong on this. Trust, okay. The number one reason people give is no reason. As a sales rep, the number one reason people don't move forward is because they disappear on you. They don't ever tell you the end. I used to tell people when I was a Paylocity sales rep, I said, my life is like one long episode of CSI Miami, right? and I watch the first 45 minutes of it, and they're about to tell you who did the murder, and then it cuts to commercial and my TV goes off. Please tell me that you didn't move forward with me at the end. Like, I will take a no over a non-response any day of the week. And the reality is your employees have the same mindset as your buyers, which is confrontation is hard and difficult and I don't want it. So rather than confront their boss, like, think about this. Would you rather argue with someone in a position of authority over you, or go to that really nice other employer that's begging you to quit and come work for them? Right? It's fuel minus friction. So this comes back to communication and career clarity, right? Setting those expectations at the beginning. Here's what we're going to do, and asking them. Like, it's funny how many times in my life I have to tell candidates and employers this, which is, have you just talked to them? Like, just ask them a question, right? It's funny. People seem to think that they can intuitively tell what the other party is thinking, and they usually guess wrong. And it costs nothing to have a human conversation with an employee and say, hey, why are you grumpy, right? And we'll talk about how to have that conversation, right? Let's talk about money. This is going to be fun, right? So money doesn't buy retention. It just gives them time to find another job. If someone is unhappy with this equation and it's money, never once have I had someone get a raise and say, oh my God, I'm staying here for the rest of my life. More often than not, when we first started Hire With, unfortunately for me, I learned some hard lessons. And one of the lessons was to ask the question, if your boss offered to counter or match an offer, would you consider taking it? And we weren't asking that at the very beginning. And we would have situations where an employer or employee would come and say, oh, I'm definitely out, I'm out. And then they get an offer from a client of ours. And then the candidate would say, actually, my boss just said he'd give me a raise of 20 grand, right? Those people kept coming back to us 4, 6, 8 months later. What happened? I thought you got that big raise you wanted. And they said, well, yeah, but my job still sucks, right? And not only that, but now I'm the most expensive employee here and I can feel it, right? They're looking at you going, you make $100,000 a year to answer the phones. You can figure this out, right? So it just puts pressure on that person. The other side of this is, don't punish loyalty by hiring at a higher salary than your existing staff. This is a very easy mistake to make because it's organic. It happens without thinking about it. It's something that people overlook all the time. You know, we had a candidate the other day who called me and said, I'm freaking out because I went on my company's career site and saw, because a lot of states require you to display the pay ranges for positions, they saw the pay range for an implementation specialist was listed as $70,000 to $90,000 a year. They're making 65. They've been there for 10. And they said, I am emotionally hurt. It's not that I need this employer to like suddenly come back and offer me a raise. It's that they didn't even consider approaching me about this. And they're trying to hire more people that know less than me for pennies on the dollar. That goes back to trust. Do they trust you as an employer? And then employees, let's be honest here. Anybody here ever have an employee who overvalues what they do for your company? Yeah. I've met them. Some of, yeah, Sometimes what happens is they can't see the forest for the trees. And I have to be a reality check for a lot of candidates at times, or sometimes they just avoid the conflict and we just reject them. I hate to say it, but we don't want to have fights for the sake of fights. Sometimes people are in a spot where they have to learn by going to the market what their worth is. And I'm not the one to tell them, you're overvaluing yourself. But what happens is, you think about a salesperson and an operations person. At Paychex, where I was a sales rep when I first started my payroll career, we were kind of mortal enemies. I don't know, was that, anybody else have that war between operations and sales internally? Why? What's the argument? Why do you think why don't they like each other?
Operations will say sales is just delivering everything. And sales will say operations doesn't want to do their job. And the great part is, I love this. My operations group, they're very busy December, January, February. And they continually say to my sales department, hey, we are so busy, stop. My one sales guy stood up and said, I'm busy 365 days a year. I work Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Don't complain that you have to work 12 hours.
Ugh.
So, I mean, they will go
Well, they don't see. And this is the thing that's really frustrating, because you as the owners can see the full story, right? You know the contribution levels. And we have heard this story over and over again from individual contributors. They say, this company couldn't survive without me, right? And then guess what? They quit and nothing happens. Company survives without them, right? You know, I think the analogy is you throw a rock in a pond and you think, wow, that's some big ripples, but give it like 5 seconds and those ripples are gone, you know? And I bring this up because the way to contextualize this is to think about this idea of, am I exposing the employees to the work that the other part of the team is doing? This is where we start talking about recognition and things like that. But I think salespeople in particular, you know, there's a story we used to tell each other when I was a paycheck sales rep, right? Well, the operations people told me this one, it cracked me up. They said, a lot of times as a sales rep, it feels like you guys are, you know, hunting bears in the woods, and you shoot the bear in the leg and the bear starts running after you all mad. And then the sales rep runs up to the cabin and opens the door, and the bear runs past into the cabin, and you close the door, and that cabin has implementation in it, right? And implementation is like, what the heck? This guy's pissed off. He promised him all this stuff we can't do. And the salesperson's like, what the heck? I just sold this big client. It's the biggest bear I've ever thrown at you. You said you wanted bear meat. Skin it. So the question becomes that equation. So let's talk about what everybody seems to care the most about, which is money. And by the way, I will say, I said this before, I'm going to say it again. I think people inherently think the money matters more than it does. This is true when I work with sellers that have sold their payroll bureau. They always say, I just want whoever's going to pay me the most. They never sell to the one who's going to pay them the most, right? They sell it based on who's going to take care of their employees and who's going to do this and that and who they emotionally like. It's not money. Same thing is true for the employees, right? There are plenty of employees who have worked for the same place for 20 years, and it was not because they were getting paid more than anyone else in the industry. But we have stats. So here is just a quick little chart. We work with people, and the first lesson I learned almost immediately, well, let me be clear, I never intended to play salespeople. Salespeople kept showing up at my door, and I said, okay, well, you have all this experience selling for Paychex or ADP or TriNet or whatever, and they always struggle when going from a large organization to a regional organization. This is a universal truth, right? And to ignore it is a bit of a fool's errand. And the reason why they fail goes back to the contribution equation. A lot of these salespeople think they are hot. I'm not gonna say that. They think they're amazing. And the reason why is because they didn't see the mechanisms that were leading to their success. They did not see the drip campaigns going to the CPA firm for the last 12 months. They didn't see the marketing department that was whipping up these really great handouts so they had some excuse to go door to door. You know, if you've ever worked at Paychex, which I'm sure some or many of you in this room have, you might remember the age of every Thanksgiving, you'd bring a pie to every CPA in your sales territory. Anybody ever do pie distribution? Yeah, I see some pie distributors. I had a trunk full of pies, and we would go CPA firm, hey, happy Thanksgiving, here's a pie, right? And the whole point of this was to build goodwill, not for me, but for Paychex, right? And they don't see this. So they quit their job and they say, I deserve a $90,000 a year base. I'm going to sell $600,000. I'm going to be the best hire you ever make. They get in there, and they don't have a sales deck. They don't have a CRM with lost clients from decades of crappy service. Sorry, Paychex and ADP. But they don't have low-hanging fruit. Everything they make, they have to grow. So what does that mean? It means it takes them longer to ramp up. They have less support to do it. The people who thrive in sales environments like this are entrepreneurs, are people that like to do things with no oversight or guidance. The people who succeed at ADP and Paychex and the other big payroll companies tend to be people who thrive under structure. And if you're hiring your first sales rep or your second or third sales rep and you don't have that kind of structure, then they're going to fail. So the other thing is employees let go because of acquisitions cost less. I talked about this a minute ago. This goes back to Renita's question about regionality. So one of the things is that when you are looking, and I think I have a bullet point talking about this one next, but I will say a lot of times when folks are coming to the job market because of conditions outside of their control, they have not been benchmarking their salaries, and their expectation is just to continue life as it has been leading up to this event. So I thought when we started doing Hire With that all these employees coming from mergers and acquisitions would cost a lot more to my clients. I thought they were going to be like rock stars that need these big salaries. And then I come to find out, dude, Betty just wants to make $50,000 a year like she has been for the last 10 years. Can you just do that? Right? So interesting thing to think about. But this is the other piece to Renita's question, right? The idea of on-site versus remote gives you the ability to choose what your salary is benchmarked against. So here's what I mean by that. If you are in Arkansas, in a rural town, and the local salary for customer service reps is like $50,000 a year, and you make a job posting that says, I'm hiring remotely, you're going to have people in New York and in California and in all these very expensive to live places applying for jobs with you. And you're going to be like, oh my God, the compensation's off the chart. By contrast, we have clients who are in New York and California and very expensive areas. And guess what they love? They love hiring remote staff from rural Arkansas, from Alabama, from places where they can pay $65,000 to someone who expected $50,000 and they're blowing their minds. Oh my God, I got this huge raise. But remember, the average was like $75,000 a year, right? So these guys are cheap. So the question becomes, how do you choose what your benchmark is? And a lot of it has to do with the way you make your job postings. If you make your job postings and say, this is an on-site job, you're not going to see the remote applicants, and the people you interact with are not going to be comparing the salaries of remote locations. By contrast, if you are in an expensive area and you make that posting remote, now that could drive down your averages. So yeah, it's something to think about. You get to choose the benchmark. And then the other thing I want to point out is there are things you can do on an ongoing basis. Come on, you. Who here has an employer Glassdoor account? Okay, who doesn't? Hands up. Okay, your homework is to leave here and register for a free Glassdoor account, right? You as an employer can go in there and respond to negative reviews. You can go in there and add your profile pictures and make you look like a big company. You have some autonomy here. And guess what? It gives you a QR code that you can give to your employees to review you, right? So something that we don't think about a lot is, why aren't you soliciting your employees to review you in the way that many of you ask your happiest clients to review you? Anybody here ask your clients to go on Google or Nextdoor or whatever and just like please give me 5 stars if you had a good experience? Like, I see your email signatures. I see the link, right? So why aren't you doing that with your employees on Glassdoor? And by the way, you can time this, right? Oh, look at that. It's a Christmas bonus. Here's a QR code. Scan that, right? That's the whole point. Because what happens, I think you've probably heard this, that a negative review is like 10 times more likely to be posted than a positive review, right? So we need to even out that equation so that future applicants have a realistic perspective of what it's like working for your company. That one I showed at the beginning had all those 1-star reviews. Those reviews were like spread out over 10 years. Do you think they've had no happy employees in the last 10 years? No. They just never asked their employees to review them online. So you're choosing whether to get one side of the story or both sides. And even if you are a terrible employer, I hate to say that, but if you are, you probably have someone that's happy. Heck, maybe your wife works for the company. Have her put in 5 stars. I hired my wife. She's my boss, so let me clarify. If you do bonus, regular, yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this. The other thing I want to highlight here is a retention audit. This is something that comes back to that point I made at the very beginning, which is just having ongoing dialogue with your team. It is a mistake to think that just because someone isn't complaining, they are happy. You have to invite that criticism. Many, many years ago, when I first got married to my co-founder and wife, we went to like a new married couples class, and they said something that has stuck with me ever since, which is enter the tunnel of chaos. Don't be afraid to go into the tunnel of chaos. And the tunnel of chaos is this idea that if there is an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had and you don't enter it because you don't want to enter the tunnel of chaos, it will fester and grow and divide you. And this is true for the relationship you have with your employees. So having one-on-ones with your employees, starting at the top, right? Because everything comes from the top, and going to your leadership team and saying, hey, how are you? How do you, what's going on here? And there's ways you can ask this. What you're trying to figure out is which fuel motivates them. So we talked about the fuel earlier. Like, why do they get excited? And making sure that their equation is working in a positive direction. And then this is my favorite thing. I don't know if you've ever looked into how to do surveys and research, but one of the best tricks whenever you're doing a survey is to ask people what others would say to a question, because people will lie to you about what they'd say. But if I say, hey, what do you think your coworkers would say about our new policy about X and Y? And it's like, oh man, they hate it, right? And what they're telling you is that they hate it. They'll be much more truthful with you if you ask them to imagine themselves in the shoes of a coworker than if you ask them to reflect their own beliefs. And by the way, nobody believes that employee feedback forms are actually anonymous. I'm sorry, they're not, right? Even if they are, like, employees don't believe it. But then making a point that this is an ongoing dialogue, it can be really easy when your company is doing well to forget to have those check-ins, right? And I think this makes sense. If everything's going fine, why are you going to stop everything and be like, how you doing? Like, it's just not a productive use of time. But the reality is that is when negativity can grow and you don't see it until someone quits. And the question is, how do we get ahead of this, find the happiest employees, direct them to control the narrative publicly about our company, and then when we find something that needs to change, identifying it earlier. If you've ever, who here was in high school? Anybody ever do that? If I don't see every hand, it means you fell asleep, right? What was the classic thing? Someone breaks up with you, and then you break up with them as quick as possible and say, no, I broke up with you first, right? So the thing is when people quit, you can usually figure it out before they're gone that they're about to break up with you. And the question is it too late to fix it? You'd find out in a retention audit, right? You could find out, hey, here's a problem this person has that I can address. But you know what I hear more than often than not anyway, at least when employers call me? I hear, this person needs to go, but I can't get rid of them yet because they're too critical. And I need to find someone to replace them before I let them go, right? What's worse is when you don't realize that someone needs to go. And then they go on their own. And you haven't had the time to prepare your organization to backfill that role. I have seen payroll companies fold because they lost too many people in one department at the same time. Arguably, my payroll company folded because I made a bad operations hire and we had a baby on the way. And I had to decide, how much work do I really want to do while my wife is giving birth? This is that question from earlier. When it's a battle between personal life and work, personal life usually wins. Sorry, I really like my girls. So when we think about having those conversations, you can kind of feel this out. And then the other thing, this is just a really minor thing, but making sure that if you start raising compensation for new hires, that you do something to make sure that your lowest paid, most senior employees are not being left behind. Because when they discover that they've been left behind, they're not leaving because of the money. They're not leaving because they wanted more. They're leaving because they feel betrayed. And we hear this all the time. Nothing is worse than feeling like, by the way, let me actually rewind a little bit. Have you ever taken away a client from ADP and Paychex, right? What does ADP and Paychex do after you take away a client of theirs? They discount, right? And they send their sales teams in. I had a client call me after I converted her off of Paychex to my bureau. And she was paying, I think it was something like $87 per week for payroll for like a little 3-employee dog grooming place. And we were doing it for like, I don't know, I think it was like $50 for a biweekly payroll, right? And she called me and she said, John, Paychex just called me and they offered to do payroll for $30 a week. And I said, oh my gosh, I can't do that. I'll lose money. Like, I'm sorry. And she said, I'm not asking you to match. I'm never going back to them. I hate them. I'm just letting you know what your competitors are doing, right? And I'm sure we've all gotten calls like that where you have loyal customers who don't care about the money and they tell you you're not the cheapest option, but that's not why I chose you. And that goes for employees too. Employees don't choose you because you pay the most and you're the best financial option. It is one of many things that make up that conversation around fuel versus friction. So I wanted to survey the room. I didn't make this into an interactive one because I'm curious. Is anyone in here doing something that they find to be unique to help retain talent? Well, I think that's it. If anybody else wants to talk to me, by all means, scan my little QR code and come stalk me, or just go to johnmasonsmith.com. I bought all versions of that website. And thank you again.